Wife's AP attacked our son. Sorry. This is a long, rambling story over the last year or so of my life. There is more detail here than you need, but hey, do it right. My 37 male wife, Emma, 37 female, and I have known each other since our first year in college. I was in school for a computer science degree, and my wife was working towards becoming a paralegal and eventually going to law school. We married while still in school and had an amazing but crazy life. We had to tag team and partner up with help from our family when Emma became pregnant with our son Jay, 16 male. We worked hard and pushed through, and I eventually started working as an engineer at a tech company while my wife pushed on with her law degree. About a year after she passed the bar, we had our daughter Jessica. Emma moved up the ranks in a local law firm and eventually landed a job at one of the top law offices in the city. She was a hard worker and quickly caught the eye of the senior partners there. Life was good for us, and we were very well off, quickly paying off our school loans and eventually buying a nice house in an upscale neighborhood. We were living the dream for a few years, working, traveling for vacations, doing the typical kids in school and sports thing, and just being a great family. About 18 months ago, my wife's work schedule got crazy busy. She often got up early and went to work, not coming home until late at night. I wasn't concerned about our relationship since she was still very affectionate during our brief time together, and she was always there for me physically. Things started to change, and soon, my wife was almost always unavailable as she was working constantly. The kids were getting upset, and my wife knew I wasn't happy, and kept reminding me that we had chosen this life so we could retire early at a young enough age so we could travel. She refused to discuss changing our work schedules and got angry when I suggested she might at least consider moving to a firm that would let her have a life and spend some time with her family. At some point, she started getting angry whenever I would bring it up. Eventually, I had enough and would ignore her during the rare times she was home at a normal time. She stopped laughing or having fun and became distant and uninterested in our lives. On one of those rare mornings, she had left her laptop open on the office desk. She went to shower before heading to work. I was at my desk when I noticed her unlocked computer screen flashing out of the corner of my eye. I looked over thinking it might be an emergency and noted that it was a work messaging program. The messages playing across the bottom of the computer were absolutely not an emergency. They were extremely unprofessional, and some were sexual. There were lots of smiley faces, hearts, and comments about how hot my wife looked the evening before, and a comment about how nice her butt looked in a skirt she wore from someone named Robert. The last line was that he would like to see it again in person soon. I took out my phone and started recording everything in the chat. I scrolled up for as much as I could in the time I had. I could take videos of many variations of the chat I was seeing from over the last few months. It was obviously from around the time my wife started working so much and checking out of our relationship. I closed her computer lid and walked out of the office. I went into the garage to get away and just fumed. About 30 minutes later, Emma opened the door to the garage and was startled I was standing there. She stopped when she looked at my face and asked what was wrong. I just looked at her with pure hatred and walked past her into the house without saying anything. After a longer than normal pause, the garage door opened and Emma backed out and left. I returned to the office and started reading through all the messages I had recorded in a hurry. The more I read, the more I was furious about what was happening behind our family's back. Emma was cheating on me with someone named Robert from her work. There was a comment saying that he was looking forward to dinner at a restaurant near the office. Their office was in the opposite direction of my work and in a busy part of the city that I rarely went to and only with my wife when we went to concerts together. I threw my phone down, got up, and showered since I felt dirty just dealing with this. When I came out of the shower, my son Jay was sitting at my desk looking at my phone. He looked up at me with sad, wet eyes. He asked if his mom was seeing another man. I took a deep breath and told him that it looked like she was cheating with someone from work. Jay asked me what I would do, and I told him honestly that I would go see a lawyer first and then confront them. I had done some research over the last couple of months because Emma had checked out of our marriage, and I wanted to be ready if she decided to leave me. The law office I chose was also in the city and was a rival firm my wife had often discussed. Jay asked if he could go along, and I couldn't say no, even though I advised him not to. He was 16 but getting close to his birthday and about to finish his junior year of high school, so he was old enough to make this decision. Jay and I called the law firm and asked to speak to the lawyer I had talked to a couple of weeks before. He had a few minutes to spare, and I was able to update him on what was going on. They sent me some documents to sign to officially bring them on board. The lawyer named Mark laughed when we had first spoken. He was aware of who my wife was by reputation and was looking forward to helping me. I told him of the meeting between Emma and her AP this evening at a restaurant nearby. I also told him I planned to record them for evidence. Mark was cautious and told me to be very careful about confronting them because he was sure her AP might be one of the firm's partners. He then offered to come with us and record them. Mark wanted to keep us from doing something stupid that would hurt our case. Dinner was still a couple of hours off, so Jay and I agreed to meet Mark at the restaurant about 30 minutes before. Mark called and got a reservation for an outside table, letting us know that most people ate outside at that time because the seating area was in the shade and the city view was amazing. Jay and I walked the city while waiting. Jay was hurt and asked if I was going to divorce his mom. I told him I wasn't sure what I would do, but Emma had lost my trust and severely damaged our family. Jay asked how we were going to tell Jessica. My daughter was with Emma's parents for another week. I told Jay that I don't know yet. We'll just need to see how things go. We sat in the park and I just listened to Jay work through his feelings. He was very hurt by what his mom was doing. We started towards the restaurant and got to it a few minutes early. Mark was already there waiting for us, and we were seated back at a corner table near the building that had a good view of the rest of the outdoor seating. Mark said that he would also take a video of my wife and her AP, but again warned me that anything that happened after I confronted her could be used against me instead of helping. I nodded and waited. It didn't take too long before my wife, Emma, and an older man in a suit walked up and spoke to the girl at the check-in. They were seated about 50 feet away from us with Emma in full view. As they walked to the table, the AP's hand was on the small of Emma's back, and he did a sleazy-ass pat as they got to the table. Emma smiled, and her AP leaned down, kissed her on the mouth, and then sat down. I could feel Jay's outrage, and he started to get up. I put my hand on his arm and told him to wait. We needed more evidence that showed the extent of Emma's infidelity. As they sat there chatting, AP would reach out and hold Emma's hand, and they would laugh and talk. AP leaned in a few times, and they kissed like lovers. They had some work papers and went through them while chatting over drinks. Mark was getting all this on video and eventually said we had enough to convince a judge or jury that they had an inappropriate relationship. Mark also admitted that Rob was one of the senior partners at the law firm and that he was married with adult kids. Mark had met Rob several times professionally. Rob was arrogant and had a temper. When I looked at Mark, he had a grin on his face. He just said Emma wasn't the only one about to lose big. Emma and Rob were drinking wine, and their food was being delivered when I stood up, faced Emma, and texted her. I asked her how the wine was and what she ordered for dinner. I saw her glance at her phone, frown, and set it back down. I texted again and asked how she could cheat on me and our family. Again, she looked down at her phone, and I could see the blood drain from her face. She said something to her AP, and he commented, waving his hand in dismissal. Emma started looking around, and when she finally turned to our table, she stood up fast, rattling the table and knocking over the wine. Jay and I walked to their table, and Emma started stammering that it wasn't what it looked like, that she was just working and celebrating a case closure with her boss, and that he was giving her a big bonus for all the work she'd been doing. I just kept a stony look, as it was obviously a lie. Jay was always quick and had a temper of his own. He looked straight at my wife, his mother, and said, "So you're cheating with this old guy, and he's paying you off with a big bonus? That makes you a high-priced whore!" He screamed the last word. Emma looked like Jay had slapped her full in the face the way her head jerked back from him. She took a few steps back, and tears started pouring down her face. People at the tables outside all turned to watch what was happening. This is where Rob made his second mistake, the first one having an affair with my wife. Rob, face red with anger, reached out and grabbed Jay by the front of his shirt and raised his hand like he was going to strike him. Jay pulled back, and Rob lost his footing and fell forward. Jay and Rob fell into a tangle, with Rob yelling obscenities at Jay. There was a loud popping sound, and Jay screamed. I had reacted and was in the process of pulling Rob off of Jay when I caught sight of his leg. It looked dislocated at the knee and was bent backward instead of forward. Without thinking about it, I threw Rob off of Jay and bent over my son. Emma was at our side screaming and crying. When Jay noticed, he bit back his pain and screamed at her to get her effing hands off of him, and he didn't want a cheating slut to touch him. Emma stood up again in total shock. There was a commotion behind us that I tried to ignore, but I could hear AP yelling at someone to let him go. I lost all sense of time while trying to help Jay, but I remember someone leaning in, saying that 911 had been called and an ambulance was on the way. He also asked if there was anything he could do to help. It dawned on me that it was Mark. A while later, Jay was being tended to by two paramedics who were getting him ready for transport to the hospital. One police officer had Rob in cuffs, and another talked to some people taking notes. Emma was sitting in a chair a couple of tables over, just blankly staring at the table in front of her. I walked over to Emma, and the last words I spoke to her that day were, "I will never forgive you for any of this. You chose another man over me and another life over our family." I turned and started walking away to hear her sobbing behind me. Jay had surgery to repair his ACL and hyperextension of his PCL. The doctor said that he should be fine after a few months of physical therapy since he was young and hadn't had any previous injuries. The good news was that his hyperextension could have been much worse. Going back to the day after Emma was caught, without the gory details, Emma professed her innocence about an actual full-on physical affair. She claims that it had not gone past kissing, sexting, and finally admitting to him feeling her up in private at the office. I told her that I didn't believe her for a minute. Regardless of those limits, she would have let them go further, and she knows it. Emma spent a lot of time crying and trying to get me to talk to her. I ignored her and demanded that she leave our home. Jay has refused to talk to her after one final acid comment on how she's dead to him. He told her he wanted nothing to do with a cheater and her child-abusing boyfriend. This brought her to tears. I chose not to interfere with Jay and Emma's relationship. That has to be settled by them, not me. I have a hard enough time keeping my temper when she's around. I have never raised my hand against a woman in my life, and I cannot even begin to cope with some of the terrible things I wanted to do out of rage. Emma is moving out to stay with her folks. Emma couldn't meet his gaze when her dad came to pick her up. Her dad is smart and knows she has done something to deserve this. While Emma was gathering some of her things, he came to me and apologized, then admitted he didn't even know what he was apologizing for. I told him that he should ask Emma, and that I would find it hard not to be blunt and hurtful. He took a deep breath, told me he was a big boy now, and wanted to hear it from me so it wasn't diluted. It was hard to keep my cool since it was only a day since D-Day. Jay was still at the hospital since surgery was scheduled for later that day. I was blunt but fair when I told him his daughter had cheated on me with her boss. I told him exactly what had been going on for the last few months, including the messages I found on her computer and what we had witnessed at the restaurant. He cringed when I told him I was there with my lawyer, putting together the evidence needed for our coming divorce. The look of his sadness was hard for me. He looked pleased when I told him Rob was arrested for assaulting and injuring Jay. It changed to an angry look when he realized that Emma was responsible for hurting Jay. He asked me if I was still planning on moving forward with a divorce. I laughed and said, "What else could I do?" He didn't answer and patted me on the shoulder, telling me thank you for everything you've done for the family. He said he hoped he and Emma's mom would still be welcome in our home. I told him, of course. Emma came out of the house and walked up to us. Her dad gave her a look of pure loathing. Emma started sobbing again. Her dad told her to get in the car and nodded to me. Emma paused and looked at me, but I could only feel disgust for her. I told her that I expected her to keep our daughter away from her AP, and if she got hurt for any reason, I'd press charges for child abuse. She lowered her teary eyes and got in the car. And they left. I know that her parents would take care of Jess and that Emma wouldn't do anything to hurt her, but I couldn't pass up the dig. Fast forwarding a bit, it's been about 8 months or so since D-Day, and things are a little different than I would have expected. Jay is doing well, but he's still refused to talk to his mom. You'd think this would be easy, but here's the kicker. Emma has refused to move out completely from our home. More on that in a bit. I had her served with divorce papers about 5 days after the restaurant debacle. Mark did a great job of pulling together the evidence, and getting it served was as easy as paying the local sheriff's department to drive to her parents' house and knock on the door. Emma had refused to come to the door in a strange attempt to stop due process. Her dad had demanded that she do the right thing, so she was shamed into talking to the deputy long enough to be handed the paperwork. The divorce itself was pretty bad for Emma. She was confronted with very damning video and photographic proof of her infidelity. To her credit, she never denied it in court. I asked for full custody of Jay at Jay's insistence, which the court agreed to. There was no way the judge would have given her any custody after Jay was injured by her AP. Jay and Jess had their own lawyer in the divorce to represent the kids because of an injury to Jay. I only asked for 50-50 custody for Jess since she's so young that she couldn't understand why her mom moved. Jess would spend half her time with her mom and the other half with Jay and me. I did get child support for Jay, and Emma was required to pay me spousal support since she was the higher earner of the two of us. We agreed that I would buy out her half of the house, and the bank accounts were divided between us. There was a catch to her house buyout that will be explained later. During the trial, Mark called Rob to the stand as a witness. Mark did this completely out of my spite for Rob and to drag him through the mud as much as we could. The fallout for Rob was swift and just. Mark told me that Rob was voted out as a partner at the law firm he helped build, not to mention the wrath of his wife. I would have loved to be a fly on that wall. It seems as if Rob's marriage was on the rocks and went from bad to insanely worse when the details of what happened, along with the evidence of an affair. His wife stormed out of the courtroom after the details were presented. He was also out on bail awaiting his criminal trial for assault on a minor. Rob settled our civil lawsuit for assaulting and injuring Jay. It was for 7 figures. Mark thinks he'll get probation and a fine for what happened in the criminal proceedings. Friends in high places and all. We did file another lawsuit against Rob's law firm since Rob and Emma claimed on Mark's video to be on company time. His former law firm settled out of court for even more than what we got from Rob himself. Amazing how embarrassing it is for your law firm for a founding partner to assault a child while being caught cheating with a subordinate. Here's where the house part gets a little strange. I guess you'd do anything for your kids. The only odd demand that Emma had before the divorce was to stay at our house in the in-law suite until the divorce was finalized. Then rent the suite until our daughter turned 18. We had a portion of the house specifically designed to allow our parents to come and visit that had its own bedroom, bathroom, small living room, and kitchenette. I agreed with the provision that a door with a deadbolt be installed to separate the two living spaces and an outside door be installed to allow access to Emma without coming through the main portion of the house. Emma agreed and moved in to be closer to the kids, maintain a semi-normal relationship with Jess, and try reconnecting with Jay. Our daughter was extremely happy that her mom could be home. Jay, however, clearly wanted nothing to do with his mom. It worked for me since Jess was happy and I rarely interacted with Emma. Jay was now 17 and a half and a senior in high school. He spent much time with friends and his girlfriend away from home during the day. When I did interact with Emma, she was always very quiet and never looked me in the eyes. She was always looking at the floor. This pissed me off because it made me feel like she never actually came to terms with what she did. I wanted her to look me in the eyes and see the pain and suffering she put me and the kids through. Here's where I got some revenge satisfaction. I went to my 20-year high school reunion and met some people I used to hang out with. One of those people was Colette, a former crush of mine who married her longtime boyfriend right after high school. She had a couple of kids, then was widowed about 10 years prior. Her husband was involved in a car accident, and she'd never remarried, being focused on raising her kids. During the evening, we chatted, and I opened up about what had happened to me and the somewhat strange living arrangements. But Colette had just said that the kids were lucky. Most parents split, and the kids pay the price because they live far apart. Colette and I had a great time together and made dinner plans. After a few dates over the next few weeks, Colette and I returned to my place for the first time. Jess stayed with her mom next door, and Jay was out with his friends for the weekend. Colette and I talked, laughed, and had a wonderful time that evening doing adult activities before she had to leave for the evening. Emma knocked on the door between our separate residences as I prepared for bed. I thought it might have been Jess, but I opened the door to an emotional Emma with tears running down her face. I asked her what was wrong, thinking again there was a problem with Jess, but Emma just stood there looking at me, devastated and angry. When I asked her again what was wrong, she said she could hear us. She asked me why I needed another woman and how I could bring one home with her still living in the house. I had not considered the fact that the two bedrooms shared a wall. I was annoyed that she'd ask these questions, so the petty and rude side of me just asked her what she expected me to do, stay celibate for the rest of my life. I told her that I would not live the rest of my life without a woman's touch, and again pointed out that at least I waited until I was single before I started a relationship. Emma had that same look of shame on her face, mixed with obvious jealousy, and just stared at the floor between us. Then I mentioned there was a door, and I'd be happy to put in more soundproofing if it would be a problem. Emma, without a word, turned and went back to her side of the house. Stay tuned for part 2 of this story coming soon.